What's up, Wellness Gang? Welcome back to Embodied Wellness Radio, a podcast framed around making women healthy again. My name is Sarah Collins, and to my left, I have my lovely co-host, Denon Maximchuk.
What is going on, everybody? Today's episode is not only going to make women healthier, it's going to make everyone healthier and hopefully debunk some of the public myths and misconceptions associated with the meat and animal farming industry in general. When I was 13, I had the lovely experience of working on a sustainable chicken farm. However, I know that's going to pale in comparison to today's guest, Bryce Pomponio, who's the owner of P&H Ranch, a local BC farm-to-table ranch that both Sarah and I are a huge fan of. Bryce, welcome to the podcast, and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your ranch.
Thanks for having me, guys. P&H is a small farm up near Quesnel, BC. It's about 62 acres, and been running that for about three years now. And I do cows, grass finished, and soon to have some chickens up and running here in the new year, and pigs as well.
Awesome. And you noted that your cows are grass finished. So many of our listeners have heard of grass-fed beef. Can you explain to them the difference between a cow that is grass-fed and one that is grass finished?
Yeah, that is kind of can be a misleading term, grass-fed. I guess all cows in Canada are grass-fed for at least a portion of their lives. And then typically, traditional beef is sent off to a feedlot where it is fed grains for the last 3 months of its life before sent to the slaughterhouse. So with grass finishing, all they eat their whole life is grass and hay. So the term grass-fed, you'll see on a lot of meat. That doesn't mean it was 100% grass-fed. It could have just been weaned from its mother's milk, been on pasture for the spring, and sent to the feedlot right after that. It's kind of like free-range chickens, right? Like that's pretty misleading as well. Like the free-range part of it could just be an area the size of my office that 1,000 chickens have the option to go be free in, but they don't put any food or water out there, so they often don't go outside. So if you want all natural beef, look for grass finished on the label.
Mm-hmm. And it's really important to understand the terms that you are buying into on labels. If you follow me or us on social media, or you're one of our clients, you know that we talk a lot about this. And this is something that I educate all of my clients on, because a lot of companies out there are putting labels on their products to, number one, put them at a higher price point, as well as sell them to consumers to make them think that they're getting something better, when in reality, they're not always better. They're just typically more expensive. And this is why understanding the meaning of different terms on a label is important, as well as making sure that you're buying from farms like P&H Ranch that you can actually trust, and that you know that the farm is really taking care of their animals, and they hold themselves to high standards as well.
So to set some context here, I think it's difficult nowadays to talk about farming without immediately having oftentimes stigmas and oftentimes really activists popping up saying, oh, animals are treated terribly on farms. Therefore, why would you eat meat? It's completely unethical. I've personally had a good experience with it. And also Sarah and I do search out local farms, even just in our lower mainland area here, where we know we can get ethically sourced meat. Could you tell us a little bit about your farm, how the animals are treated, and maybe tell us a little bit more about inside the industry?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point there. Like I said in the intro there, my farm's pretty small, 60 acres. So I know all my animals' names. They're not just like a number on the ledger kind of thing. So for me, I have that connection with them. And I think in large operations, when, they're just a number, you disassociate yourself, like the whole living creature thing can become blurred if, they're just kind of, like just a number. So I think when you get the smaller operations, generally grass finishes are smaller because the land it takes to finish them. You get that connection with the animal. You want it to be healthy. You don't want to see it suffer. You take the extra initiative to get out there when it's -30, water's still flowing, and that sort of thing.
And I think that this term of ethics, or this idea of ethics, it also is a little bit of a blurred line. And this is coming from someone who was vegan for about 6 years. So I've done my time in the vegan world for ethics. And what many people miss out on is that even when, we won't get too much into this, even when you're eating a vegan or a vegetarian diet, it still comes at the cost of a lot of animals, right? Like rabbits, insects, bugs, when they're doing the huge farming of like wheat or just corn or anything like that, is that there still is the price of animals within that. And so when you're buying into ethical meat, or you're buying into a farm, like Bryce said, where he knows all of his animals' names, like you feel better about buying that meat as opposed to just like large farming practices that are still destroying animals and insects on the way.
It's pretty crazy when you're doing like a big monocrop like soy or corn, how many rodents and snakes and like millions and maybe billions every year die from farming those monocrop fields. But I guess they're not cute enough for people to care, maybe.
So all of your awesome animals that you know by name, take me through kind of like a day in the life. I've seen videos online. I sent you a few from that Ohio dairy farmer, and he goes and shows exactly like their living situations, all of this stuff. Tell me like what happens in the day of the life of a beautiful cow.
Well, this time of year, they're off pasture and they're in the corrals now. So that looks like a large fenced area with shelters for them to sleep in and get out of the wind. There's heated water troughs and round bale feeders for hay. So a typical morning in the winter is get up, fill up the water, make sure it's not frozen, and make sure they got their hay out there, and cleaning out the stalls. The animals don't know where the bathroom area is, so everywhere is the bathroom for them. So that's a big part of keeping the environment that they live in clean, because if they're laying in their own filth, that gets on their fur, and when it's time for them to become food, that creates a unsanitary environment there. So they are quite cared for when it's cold out, and then once we hit springtime, they're taken out to a number of pastures I have that they're rotated through, and I have a river running through my property, or small creek, and they get their water from that and munching on all the forage I got here.
I was listening to a few podcasts from Anya Frenald, who owns Belcampo Meats down south of the border, our friends down there. And she was talking about the importance of rotating the animals around the farms and such. And I was also listening to podcasts from Dr. Zach Bush talking about the importance of removing glyphosate from all your crops and the grass and all that things, as that chemical is so horribly detrimental to the human body. One of your titles is A Sustainable Farm. And I want to know, what does that even mean? Like, do you have crops as well? When it comes to rotating the animals, why are you doing that? And why is it important to have these aspects of a farm?
Well, that's a good question there. I'm glad you brought up the glyphosates there, because a lot of big operations use that to kill the weeds, the broadleaves that kind of overrun the hay crops and especially the monocrops there. So that's something that's not organic, and it was originally developed by a Monsanto chemist. So anytime you hear the M word there, you want to
head for the hills.
Yeah, it's been linked to cancer, and it's not just farms that use it. BC Forestry has been spraying the forests from airplanes with this stuff for years, and because they've got an agenda with pine trees that they want to replant with pine trees, which aren't native to a lot of the areas up here, and they spray the whole area, killing all the forage for all the animals. And a lot of ranchers will take their cattle out to range in the summer, right? Because their farms are being grown for the hay crop. So they grow the hay, the cows are out in the rangelands, and once they cut it, they bring the cows home to munch on it after harvest. So when they're out on these rangelands, they're missing out on all this forage because of all the spraying that's being done by our BC Forest Ministry there. So so that's a concern to all of us. But back to the sustainability of farming, I think that when you have enough room on your farm to rotate your cattle through the pastures, allowing the grass to be in its optimal growing state, right? Too short, it's going to take a long time to come back, and too long, and then it gets to seed and over matures. So by rotating your cattle around the pastures, you keep it optimal levels, optimal proteins for the animals, and you're also letting their manure naturally fertilize the soil instead of having to fertilize with chemicals. So my farm hasn't been sprayed with any herbicides, pesticides, or fertilizers in over 15 years. The previous owners stopped. The previous owners stopped actually farming here 15 years ago. So when I bought it, it did need some love, but I can get organic certification immediately. I've got one big field out there that I'm working up this spring, so it'll be tested after I work it out by one of our local governing bodies for organics. So I hope to be able to say I'm organic certified next year. So
amazing. And getting certifications is not just a process where you're like, hey, I'm organic. There's governing bodies that hold farms and hold any company to certain standards for getting certifications. So can you let our listeners know a little bit about how you would go about getting a certification and what that means for you as a farmer?
And how strict is it?
It is really strict. I've already applied for it a year and a half ago. And so what they're going to do with that is they're going to send someone out randomly to do soil tests on all my pastures and fields, and that'll be analyzed, and then they'll randomly come back one or two more times in the next year, do more testing and samples, and then I'll be issued a certificate for being organic, and after that they can randomly come and test again to make sure you're not squeaking in any prohibited items on there. So I've got a printout here of about this thick of approved fertilizers and pesticides, which you can use to keep your yields up. So you don't have to just go all natural, and well, you can protect your investment. It does cost a lot of money to seed a field. So it is nice to know that there are organic fertilizers out there that I can use.
That's super interesting. Just to give context back to like one of the past comments that we made about glyphosate. If you're unfamiliar with what glyphosate is, it's essentially a water-soluble chemical compound, and it's Roundup, the same thing that you would see at your like local Home Depot or something that you could pick up as a weed killer for your gardens and your lawns. Although it does work very well temporarily to kill off the weeds, this is used in mass in the farming industry, and now, like, as we just heard, also in the BC forestry, which is very, very concerning to me. And yeah, like Bryce was saying, it's been linked to cancer, autism, and many, many, many other things. Not only that, but given the fact that it is a water-soluble compound, it gets into our environment, and it takes a minimum of 50 years to get it out of an environment. Because it's water-soluble, it will come out of our ground, it'll evaporate out into the air, it'll be into the clouds, and eventually it kind of just gets everywhere. One of the issues with this is that we're starting to see on a mass scale sickness from all sorts, and especially in the gut health region. So if this is getting into our bodies, this chemical that's basically just killing everything, it's destroying our insides of our digestive tracts as well. So eventually, I'd love to get Dr. Zach Bush on to talk about this, because I know he could just go on for hours.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people have a misconception that organic doesn't matter. You hear that all the time. And honestly, I used to think that. I was like, well, F it, I'm eating vegetables. But it really does matter. And so if you actually think about the point of like pesticides and herbicides, they're killing off bugs. How big is an insect or a bug? I can see it with my eyes. And then you're ingesting the same chemicals. How small are the microbes or the bacteria in your stomach? Way smaller than what they're trying to kill out there. And so when we ingest these things into our body, we're killing off a lot of our good gut bacteria. And really, gut bacteria or a healthy and diverse microbiome is foundational for your overall health and really every other system of the body. And when we look at this, when we're talking specifically about beef or red meat, what the animal is fed and what it is exposed to in its environment directly impacts the nutritional value of that meat. And so if you were to take, there's lots of studies. In fact, we linked a study and we chatted a little bit more about this in our previous podcast on nutrition for stress support. So if you haven't listened to that one, check it out. But they have done a lot of studies just to show the difference in nutritional value of a traditional or a conventionally grown crop of red meat versus a grass-fed and grass-finished organic cow. So the levels of omega-3, which is pro-inflammatory, to omega-6, omega-6, which is pro-inflammatory, to omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory, are completely different just based off of what the cow is eating and the quality of that meat. The nutritional value of vitamins and minerals is a lot higher in meat that you're buying that is grass-fed, grass-finished, and organic than it is in conventional meat. And so really the quality of the food that we're taking in, the way that the cow was raised, how happy the cow was, because we know just how impactful our mind is on our body and our health, the types of food that they're fed, and their overall quality of life play a huge role in the nutritional value of the food that you're buying.
What she said.
Mic drop.
The ratios from a grass finished cow are from 6 to 3 ratios are 2 to 1, and the grain finished is 9 to 1. So if you're eating traditional grain finished beef, you really would have to supplement your omega-3s to get that ratio up. And that's not always feasible for a lot of people.
So sorry, just to confirm, you're saying I want to make sure I hear this right. In a grass-finished beef, as compared to just a traditional one, there's a 9 to 1 difference in omega-3 to omega-6 ratio?
6 to 3 ratio in grass finished is 2 to 1. And in grain finished, it's 9 to 1.
Wow.
Which is crazy high.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So what are some of the other notable differences that somebody's going to notice when they purchase from a sustainable, ethical ranch such as yourself?
Well, I think the main two big points there are going to be the stress of the animal, and you'll be able to taste that difference. Traditional beef is the animals are trucked around 2 or 3, maybe 4 different times in their life over long distances, which is very stressful. And their final truck stop is at a slaughterhouse where they're extremely stressed. And the new way of slaughtering beef, I don't know if you guys have seen the videos out there of this, is it's hard to watch guys in the last few minutes of their life, and most mammals are affected by stress in a negative way in the flavor of the meat. So at my place and other small places, we have an abattoir come in, which is like a mobile slaughter person, and they'll come in and the animal doesn't even leave their home really. Like it's all done on site and sent off to your butcher like that. So you can really tell the difference in the quality just on the way they're treated. Another aspect of that is the feed too. So you are what you eat, right? So if you're in a feedlot and you're getting poisoned with grains, you have to get antibiotics. If they're going to get sick, and you're basically making them sick, right? To fatten them up the fastest. So like a grain finished animal can be finished in 3 months. Grass finished is anywhere from 6 months to a year. So you can kind of see the economics there, right? If it's all dollars and cents to you, then the more beef you can pump in and out, the more money you're going to generate. So grass finished beef is more expensive for that reason, that it takes a lot longer to get them up to weight.
I wasn't aware of the new ways that animals are being slaughtered after a honestly not probably very great life on these massive farms. I don't really want to get into that or how it's done, because I'll probably end up crying, but it does, obviously, to play devil's advocate, like there is a point that a lot of these activists do have when they're approaching farms, and I would say painting with too wide of a brush though. Have you faced any backlash from activists, and what are kind of some of the main things that you're approached with and have to rebuttal?
I think my side of the fence here with the grass finishing is I haven't noticed any activism in that side of the thing. I think they are painting with a wide brush and saying meat is bad. I think a lot of these activists are vegetarians, so we'll get kind of piled into that. But It's the slaughterhouses and the grain, they're the feedlots that are taking the brunt of this, and they're not all bad. These, there's outfits out there that are doing things the right way, but it seems to be directed at the grain finishing side of the fence here, which I think is where the biggest change needs to be in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's really easy for people to just group things together in their mind where it's like, oh, every piece of red meat is X, Y, and Z versus like actually taking a deeper look at the differences. And I had a reel that I made on Instagram not too long ago about Beyond Meat versus a regular meat burger, went kind of viral. And I caught a lot of backlash from that. And I was very surprised at how much misinformation is out there and how tightly people cling to certain things that they believe, even if they might not be fully true. And so a big one that obviously comes up when you're talking about red meat is red meat causes cancer. And maybe we'll do an entire podcast on this. However, it's important to actually look at like where this information came from, what studies they're referring to, and also the clinical significance of those studies. So you hear this argument a lot, but when you actually look at the studies that were done, most of them are looking at a standard American diet, which is not just red meat, it's low quality red meat mixed with a bunch of other inflammatory crap in fast food, eating whatever they want, versus someone who's on a whole food plant-based diet. Well, no wonder one of those is going to be worse from you. And the next step is looking at the study's significance. So in order for something to be significant in science, it needs to have a value of 2.0. The link between red meat and cancer is less than 1. I forget the exact, do you know the exact stat?
No.
It's way less than 1, something that would make you laugh at it. Well, we'll put it in the show notes. And it's just interesting to watch kind of the narrative that's pushed and also who is pushing that and who is buying into that. And when you actually kind of look past that and start to actually chat with farmers and actually look at the studies and understand how nutrition works and the difference between high quality and low quality meat, it's pretty unfortunate that there is such a misconception about red meat in general, which can be such a beautiful bioavailable source of protein and nutrients.
I would also argue a lot of that is economically driven, though. I mean, if you look at the propaganda that I would like, people like Dr. Greger from nutritionfacts.org, who has huge stakes in the vegan documentaries that have been coming out, Game Changers, or my personal favorite is one that I took down years ago, which was What the Health, where I basically laid out all of the science that was presented in this documentary and actually read the studies or looked for the studies that they referenced in that movie. Most of them were either cherry-picked information or they were just flat out twisting the numbers to fit their narrative. Now, there's money behind a lot of these pushes, right? And same thing when we're looking at Bill Gates, for example, buying up massive amounts of farmland in North America, number one, to make beans and soy and all of these things that support his investments in Beyond Meat burgers and the alternative meat industry, but also to make sure that we don't have larger plots of land for more sustainable farms, much which is your goal. And like I mentioned earlier, like Anya Fernald from Belcampo, she has this vision of making this massive global sustainable farming movement. And a lot of these big billionaires with money in the fake meat or alternative meat industries are really trying to stomp that down. So there is a lot of information. And when you are starting to surf the internet or surf especially documentaries, which are very poor sources of information, yes, they may be referencing studies, but one of the best things I would say that you can do is actually look into the quote unquote research that they're using to support it. And a lot of the times it may look like a lot of scientific jargon and you might have to learn how to actually read this science. But for the sake of your health and your family's health, it's important to dive in a little bit further into it.
Yeah, and it's really important to also be able to have discernment on where this information is coming from. Does this apply to me and how might it apply? So let's take a little back step and go back to the Beyond Meat. Yeah. Bryce, as somebody who does ethical farming of high quality grass finished beef, what are your thoughts on Beyond Meat?
Well, thanks for asking me about that. But
we just opened Pandora's box, people.
Well, my opinion of that synthetic meat has changed over the years. I know when the guys at Beyond there first started producing, I checked out the ingredient list that they published, and it didn't look too bad. bad. I tried it. It didn't taste too bad. But I think once they went big time, and I don't know if they got bought out or they just, maybe went public and had shareholders to think about, they had to really change the quality of their ingredients. And it took a big hit, I think, in quality to appeal to the masses. Like, people aren't going to buy synthetics if they cost a lot more than the real thing. So I don't think synthetic meat is going to compete with real meat until they can A, make it just as healthy or healthier, and B, get the price equal or less than real beef. It's directly going to impact me if they do get those things done. But the standard American diet is red meat heavy, right? So if we can reduce the carbon footprint of farming beef, like with the feedlots and that thing, by making synthetics, I'm all for it. I think synthetics could be the future, but it's not yet. It's basically the vegetarian hot dog.
Mm-hmm.
I would say so. And I would argue that I don't think they're selling on the values of health. And most of the time, I think they're marketing it as an emotionally charged purchase more than anything. Like, if you take it side by side and you look at the nutritional density of a Beyond Meat burger or any alternative meat or synthetic meat, as you called it, next to true grass-fed, grass-finished red meat, it's laughable. It's laughable. It's not even the same. It's like me eating an ice cream cone as compared to this beautiful, dense meal with all of these greens and veggies and beautiful things and colorful fruits and stuff. So it's incomparable, and I don't like that a lot of the time. It's still being compared one to one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
so outrageous comparisons.
It is.
Let's take it back a little bit to the environmental aspect. So, Bryce, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how your farm is different than, let's say, a conventional farm in just the overall carbon footprint and the impact on the environment.
And to add to that, one more question just on top. In general, do you also believe that the meat industry is actually that large of a carbon contributor as compared to as many things? Because it does seem to be villainized. But anyways.
Yeah, those are both good questions there. I think the one thing the negative that I am doing is I'm small and I have farm equipment. So if I was, say, triple in size, I wouldn't need more equipment, right? So the nature of small farming, I'm going to burn more diesel for my farm equipment than a farm triple my size. So there's that carbon increase in small farming, but the animals themselves are eating natural food, right? They're not producing as much methane when they're eating what they're intended to eat. It's when they're in the feedlots, they're standing, knee deep in their own filth. Extra equipment is used in those feedlots to move the manure in piles. It's just the seepage into the ground, to the water table there. It's affecting communities that live near feedlots. It's the health of this broken system is affecting the communities that live around them. So I think the whole sustainable farming of rotating your cattle through pastures is definitely better for the surrounding environment as well as the animals themselves.
Mm-hmm. So when you
did I miss one of those questions there?
Oh, yeah. I think the only question would be, as far as the impact environmentally of farms in general on the environment, it seems to be a highly villainized thing. Is that fair, or do they have some ground to stand on?
No, that's fair. I think the methane that these animals produce does have an impact on our environment. If we as a people ate less beef, then yeah, that would have a good impact on our environment. But I don't the data that I see when I look this up, it seems a little off to me. Like I've got neighbors who have large operations, and it just doesn't seem accurate to me, in my opinion.
So for our listeners who are wondering, how the heck does a cow produce methane? Are we talking about production from the actual equipment or the cow? And some people are probably really confused at how a cow itself can be producing methane. Can you let the listeners know what that is? It's my favorite question so far.
Yeah, simply put, cow farts. They fart a lot. Like I'll get startled sometimes by it, and they produce a lot of manure. Like I've got a special spot where I fill up a tractor bucket and go dump it and make my own compost, and it's a chore that's got to be done, if not daily, every other day. So the animals themselves produce. Let me back up there for a second. The animals, they do produce a decent amount of methane, but that amount is correlated to what they're eating too. So kind of like if we go out and eat fast food, as humans, we might produce a little bit more methane than if we were eating a healthy diet.
Mm-hmm. And part of that has to do with just the overall fermentation that happens in the gut when an animal is eating something. So methane is typically produced when you have nutrients in your body that are starting to ferment, which can be produced by your digestive efficiency and just your body's overall ability to break down the food that you're eating. So if you're having foods such as crappy hay or from conventional feedlots, you're going to be as a cow not digesting the food as well, which will then produce more gas and methane.
Yeah, cows don't eat grains. They don't eat corn, and it's not their natural food. They can't digest it, so that's where you're getting all that extra gas coming from. They just can't break down the food that they're being fed by us.
That's super interesting. I wonder if there's a possibility to figure out data as far as how much increase in percentage of methane that a grain-fed cow, a corn-fed cow would have in comparison to something like your cows. I wonder if there's some data out there on that. But as far as any other misconceptions or things that you think us city folk don't understand and probably need to understand more about your meats and your animals, or maybe this farming practices in general, what would you like to tell the people?
Well, I think looking at labels and knowing where your food comes from is probably one of the more important things you can do when you're doing your shopping. And just keep in mind that there are those catchphrases, those flashy words that we all think are good and healthy, but they are misleading. It is just part of marketing food. So get out the Google there and look up and see where your grocery store gets its beef from. If your budget isn't allowing you to go out and buy these great cuts of beef from the supermarket, you can always find small farms like me where you can get a half cow or a quarter cow, and that'll save you a lot of money over the course of a year. It's more of an initial investment, but over the course of the year, it's much cheaper than a grocery store and much higher quality.
So where can people find you at? Say they do want to invest in their health and invest in a quarter or a half of a cow where they can stock up their freezer and get all this delicious meat, which we have half of our freezer is also of your delicious meat. Where can they find you at?
I'm on Instagram at p.h.ranch, and my website's phranch.ca. And you can place your orders right through Instagram. That's probably the best way to reach me. My website isn't set up for order taking yet, but as most of us have our phones in our pockets, and Instagram will let you know right away when one comes in. So I've got pictures on there of the farm and the animals and all the good times they're having. So check that out.
We've got to get you more active on there, showing off more of the daily operations and whatnot. But as far as your actual, say I want to place an order, you do have order periods coming up, right? How many times a year do you actually have availability for people to place orders? It's
at this point, I'm doing it twice a year. So I do winter beef and spring or summer beef, and it's all done by the hot hanging pound. So if you wanted half a cow, I'd just say on average, it's about $4,000 a cow. So you divide that in half or into a quarter, and it all depends on their weight. So give or take a few $100, and you're gonna need a deep freeze. If you don't have one, then what I've been doing with you guys is doing little packs. I'll come down. I come down to the coast every month, and I can bring small quantities too. So for those guys that live in apartments, we can help you out too with some small packs.
Us city folk, eh? All those tiny little freezers, but we make it work. We're actually thinking about getting a little another fridge or a freezer and just putting it in a storage room, because it's so worth stocking up on all this awesome stuff.
Yeah, especially with the cost of beef is going up. This COVID has impacted the beef market quite a bit. I'm gonna have to. It's going to cost me more next year to buy calves. So, the price of beef is going to go up. So you stock up this winter and next spring and get ahead of the game.
Amazing. Sarah, anything else you'd like to say?
I think that's everything.
Amazing. So if anybody has any questions or they want to look back at any of the podcast notes can be found at embodiedwellnessco.com/blog/meat podcast. Bryce, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm going to have all your information linked in the podcast notes. And I'm so excited for people to invest in their health and invest in smaller sustainable practices that are in general just going to help not only our local economy, but our health conscious buying all around. So thank you so much for coming on today, and we'll see you again next time, everybody.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. This podcast provides general information and discussions about health and related subjects. The information and other content provided in this podcast or any linked materials are not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. If you or any other person has medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider and seek other professional medical treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you may have heard on this podcast or any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The opinions and views expressed on this podcast are of no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution.